So we're going to think about the parable of the unjust steward. This is in Luke chapter 16, and this is one of the most difficult parables of Jesus. Now, a steward was someone who was employed by a rich man who had a big family and a big house to sort of manage everything around the house. And he would have dealt with ordering the food and ordering all the different things that were needed to run a huge house, because the rich man who owned the house would have had maybe not just his wife and his children, but he would have had lots of servants, slaves. He would have had relatives of his own and of his wife's, and may have been grandchildren of his own and children of his slaves, and these were very, very big families. So then, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, this manager, who organised everything practical in the house, just like Joseph was in the house of Potiphar.
Was it rare to just have one child, sort of?
No, they would have had lots of children, probably more children than we have today in our families.
Why is that?
Well, for one thing, children died. For another thing, they tended to have more. For another thing, having children was a way of having someone to look after you when you were old. There were no sort of old people's homes, or the government didn't look after you. People were more family oriented. And I think people were more generous.
What did this use for short? What did they call not very many children?
Well, it would have been unusual to have just one or two children. They would have had generally lots of children, and sometimes they had more than one wife. So, there was a rich man with this big family who had a steward. And this man was accused unto him that he'd wasted his goods. He'd wasted maybe the olive oil, or he'd wasted the corn, or whatever. So he called him and said to him, "How is it that I hear this about you? Give an account of your work, because you can't any longer be the steward." Then the steward said within himself, "What shall I do? My Lord is taking away from me the job of being steward. I can't dig. To beg, I'm ashamed." So he thinks, what can I do when I lose this job? Shall I go out and get a job digging? No, I'm not very strong. Maybe he was getting older in years. I can't do that. I'm ashamed to just beg. I know what I shall do. I'm definitely going to do this, so that when I am put out of the stewardship and I lose the job as a steward, they may receive me into their families. He was being thrown out of the family of his master. He thought, well, I will try and get into other people's families. So he called everyone who was in debt to his lord. He called them to him, and he said to the first, "How much do you owe my lord?" He said, "I owe him 100 measures of oil." The steward said to him, "Take the bill, sit down quickly and write 50. In other words, he said, "Look, just say that you owe 50, not 100. Then he said to another, "And how much do you owe?" And he said, "I owe 100 measures of wheat." He said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. And the Lord commended this unjust steward, because he'd done wisely. For the children of this world are, in their time, wiser than the children of light. And I tell you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon which is unrighteous, so that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. He that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much."
I don't quite understand what it's talking about.
Well, I think we all think that. That's what I think as well. What is all this talking about? Well, when you read the Bible, you've got to read it in context. And I said that this is in Luke chapter 16. And it follows on from what we just read in Luke chapter 15. And there we had 3 parables really about repentance. We just read the parable of the 2 sons, the prodigal son, the one who repented. and was welcomed back, although he also had wasted his father's goods. So, you could read it as Jesus simply saying, look, we've all sinned, and so there is now an account that is to be made, and there will be an account at the day of judgment. So what should you do? You should just go out and forgive people, left, right and centre, so that when you are judged, you therefore will have mercy shown upon you because of what you have done to them. But then we think, well, when he says to these people, like, you owe 100 measures of oil, well, just say that you owe 50. And he says to the other man, well, you owe 100 measures of wheat, well, let's just say you owe 80. I think that was sort of not right, because it wasn't for him to do that. He was only a steward. He was only working on behalf of the owner. And the point Jesus seems to make out of this is to say, well, be wise with money and what he calls the mammon of unrighteousness, so that when you fail, you then might be saved. So it could be that Jesus is telling this as a story about forgiveness, which is, as I say, the context. That's what went before in Luke chapter 15, along with the idea of wasting your father's goods. But then he sort of adds on to it and says, yeah, and also out of this story you can also get a lesson about being wise about money and material things. Just let it go. Somebody owes you something, well, don't demand it too much, because in the end there comes a day of judgment and you also are going to need mercy. So you're right, it is a difficult parable. It's the most difficult, I think, of all the parables of Jesus. But as always, there are some simple lessons there, that we know that judgment is coming, when we shall have to give an account. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And we must therefore forgive others their debts. And also, we've got to use money wisely and not demand our debts. You did this to me, therefore I demand that you do this. I demand that you say sorry. I demand this, that and the other. No, that is not the way to be, because we ourselves are in debt. We ourselves have done wrong.